November 25, 2024. Douglas O'Regan releases his groundbreaking book, Taking Nazi Technology, at Johns Hopkins University. National interest poses a provocative question. Did Nazi technology propel the USA to superpower status? The answer will shock you, but the biggest beneficiaries weren't even the Americans. October 22, 1946, 3 a.m. Soviet secret police raid apartments of German engineers. Operation Paperclip's shadow begins. 2,500 German scientists and technicians are deported within 24 hours. Their families, 4,000 people, are forced to come along. The total, 6,000 Germans, whisked away to Russia. Among them, Hermann Klaue, Ernst Lehr, the inventors of the Panther tank's torsion bar suspension. 1 year later, 1947, the first T-54 rolls out of the factory in Nizhny Tagil. 100,000 units are built over the next 30 years. Every single one utilizing German suspension technology from 1943. Fast forward to today, February 2025, Ukraine, Avdiivka. A T-90M, Russia's most advanced tank, is struck by a Ukrainian drone. The torsion bars shatter. The tank is immobilized. The same torsion bars, the same technology. Panther 1943, 82 years later. No royalties paid, ever. Today I'm going to show you the documented technological lineage from Ernst Lehr in 1943 to the T-90M stuck in the Ukrainian mud in 2025. The biggest technology copycat story in military history. Do you grasp the scale of this? 350,000 tanks worldwide. T-54, T-55, T-62, T-72, T-80, T-90, T-90M, M46 Patton, M47, M48, M60, M1 Abrams, Leopard 1, Leopard 2, Challenger, Merkava, Leclerc, Type 96, Type 99, K1, K2 Black Panther, Arjun. Every single one of these tanks uses torsion bar suspension, all based on the German design from 1943. The numbers are astounding. If we just calculate the torsion bars themselves, 350,000 tanks times an average of 12 torsion bars per tank equals 4.2 million torsion bars produced. Material value, conservatively 10 billion euros just for the bars themselves. But the true value, the tank development programs, 500 billion euros globally invested in technology based on German war research from 1943. No licensing fees, not a single euro paid to Germany. The Soviet Union alone produced 200,000 tanks with German torsion bars. The USA, 35,000. China, 20,000. And today in Ukraine, T-90Ms are battling Leopard 2s. The ultimate irony, German Panther 1943 versus German Panther 1943. Both sides using identical suspension concepts. Germany is paying billions for the Leopard 2, buying back its own stolen technology. But let me start at the beginning. 1942. Henschel Industries, Kassel. The German armed forces needed a medium tank that could take on the Soviet T-34. The problem wasn't just armor or firepower, it was mobility. The T-34 had a Christie suspension with large wheels. Off-road mobility was excellent, but the suspension had a critical disadvantage. 180 millimeters of suspension travel, maximum. That meant at high speed over rough terrain. Hard impacts. The crew would be tossed around. Aiming accuracy while moving was practically zero. German engineers knew this. They had tested captured T-34s. The American Sherman had coil springs. Suspension travel, 150 millimeters. Even worse. The British with the Churchill used leaf springs. Suspension travel, only 140 millimeters. Completely inadequate for rapid tank operations. The German solution had to be better, much better. Dr. Ernst Lehr and his team at Henschel developed a revolutionary concept, double torsion bars. Take a look at this. A torsion bar is a long steel bar made from a special chromium-molybdenum-vanadium alloy. It's heat-treated at 850 degrees Celsius. The bar is attached to the chassis at one end and to the road wheel at the other. When the wheel hits an obstacle, the bar twists. The elasticity of the steel stores the energy and releases it in a controlled manner. Simple physics, but genius in execution. Lehr's breakthrough: 2 torsion bars per wheel station, folded one above the other. This doubled the effective length of the spring in a compact space. The result, 250 millimeters of suspension travel, 40% more than the T-34, 67% more than the Sherman, almost twice as much as the Churchill. What did that mean in practical terms? The Panther could travel at 46 kilometers per hour over rough terrain, and the crew could still aim. The gunner could hit an enemy vehicle at 1,500 meters while moving through rough terrain. Something that was physically impossible with American or Soviet tanks in 1943. But there was another advantage that the Allies wouldn't understand until 1944. Torsion bars are incredibly robust. A Sherman with coil springs. If one spring broke, the entire wheel station was out of action. The repair required the removal of multiple components. Time required: 6 to 8 hours under field conditions. A Panther with a torsion bar. Even if one bar was damaged, the second bar continued to function. The tank remained mobile. The repair could be done after the battle. No tactical breakdown. German engineers perfected the system between March and September 1942. In September 1942, the first Panther Model D left the production line. The torsion bar suspension was standardized. By May 1945, 6,000 Panthers had been produced, every single one with the double torsion bar system. The Allies initially knew nothing about it. February 1943, Tunisia. British troops captured the first intact Panther near Kasserine Pass. The vehicle was immediately shipped to England, Bovington Tank Museum. The British engineers were stunned. They measured the suspension travel, 250 millimeters. Their Churchill managed 140 millimeters. The report from March 15, 1943, was damning. The German suspension is superior to ours in every measurable parameter. Recommendation: immediate study for British tank development. But the British were already producing Churchill, Cromwell and Crusader tanks. The production lines were established. A switch to torsion bars would halt production for at least a year. They decided continue with the inferior technology. The war couldn't wait. The Americans captured their first Panther in July 1943 in Sicily. The vehicle was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Aberdeen was the technical heart of the U.S. Army Ordnance. All captured enemy weapons were analyzed here. The Panther was completely disassembled. Every part was measured, weighed, photographed and tested. The report from September 1944, 127 pages, is still preserved in the National Archives today. I quote directly from page 47, "The torsion bar suspension of the Panther shows extraordinary technical sophistication. The dual torsion bar configuration. It offers 66% more suspension travel than our M4 Sherman coil springs, all while taking up less volume in the chassis. The material properties of those German torsion bars, they surpass our current spring steels in durability and elastic limit. Technically speaking, the Germans had achieved in 1943 what the US wouldn't be able to replicate until the late 1940s. But here's the big question. Why? What made the German torsion bars so superior? The answer lies in the metallurgy. German torsion bars in 1943, chromium molybdenum vanadium steel. Carbon content, 0.45 to 0.55%, chromium 0.8 to 1.1%, molybdenum 0.15 to 0.25%, vanadium 0.1 to 0.2%, heat treatment. Oil quenched at 850 degrees Celsius, tempered at 420 degrees. Result: tensile strength 1,600 megapascals, yield strength 1,400 megapascals. That was cutting-edge technology back in 1943. American spring steels in 1943. Carbon manganese steel, tensile strength 1,200 megapascals, yield strength 1,000 megapascals, 25% weaker. The Aberdeen report recommends immediate adoption of the German alloy composition. But there's a problem. The US had already produced 40,000 Shermans by 1944, all with coil springs. The production lines are running at full capacity, 2,000 tanks per month. Switching to torsion bars would mean a complete chassis redesign, new tooling, new production lines, new suppliers for specialized steel alloys, time investment at least 18 months. The Army says, no. We're winning with quantity. A Sherman costs $44,000. A Panther costs the equivalent of $115,000. We can produce 3 Shermans for every 1 Panther. The losses are acceptable. So thousands of American soldiers are sent into battle in tanks with inferior suspension. And they know it. The crew reports are damning. An M4 Sherman commander writes in January 1945, after the Battle of St. Vith, "We can't aim while moving. The Panther can. At 800 meters. With both vehicles in motion, it hits us 3 times before we even get a chance. It's not a fair fight. It's murder." But the Army answers, "Hang in there. We have more tanks." The British are more pragmatic. Starting in 1944, they begin to study captured German torsion bars. Not for the Churchill. It's being phased out anyway, but for the next generation of tanks, this will be important after the war. But the Soviets have a different plan. The Soviet Union captures its first intact Panther. In July 1943 at Kursk, the vehicle is immediately taken to Kubinka. The Kubinka Proving Ground near Moscow is the Soviet version of Aberdeen Proving Ground. All captured German weapons are examined here. The report dated March 15, 1945. I have the translation from the Russian National Archives, declassified in 1991. It's even more detailed than the American one. The Soviets measure everything. They test the torsion bars to destruction. They analyze the metallurgy. They understand this is the future of tank design. But in 1945, the Soviet Union is producing 30,000 T-34s per year. That's the largest tank production in the world. They can't stop. The T-34 is winning the war. It's good enough. But after the war, they will copy this technology, completely copy it. And they'll need the engineers who understand it. October 22nd, 1946, 3 a.m. Soviet secret police NKVD simultaneously raids hundreds of apartments throughout Germany in the Soviet occupation zone. The operation is called Operation Paperclip's Shadow. It had been planned months in advance. The targets, German scientists, engineers, technicians, specializing in rockets, aircraft, tanks, submarines, electronics. Any engineer who worked for the German armed forces is a potential target. The method is brutally efficient. 3 a.m., a knock at the door, NKVD officers with lists. You have 1 hour to pack 30 kilograms of luggage per person. Your family has to come with you. No discussion. Anyone who refuses is arrested. Anyone who flees is shot within 24 hours. 2,500 engineers and technicians are arrested. 4,000 family members, wives, children are forced to come along. Total, 6,000 Germans deported to Russia, among them Hermann Klaue, 52 years old, senior engineer at Henschel Industries, specializing in tank suspension, co-developer of the Panther torsion bars, Ernst Lehr, 48 years old, chief engineer, chassis development, the man who invented the dual torsion bar configuration. They are deported to Nizhny Tagil, Ural region, 1,400 kilometers east of Moscow. That's where the Soviet Union's largest tank factory is located, Uralvagonzavod. This is where the T-34 is produced, 30,000 units per year during the war. Now, in 1946, production continues. But Stalin has ordered, develop a new tank, better than anything the West has. And you have the German engineers to show you how. Hermann Klaue is taken to a small apartment on the factory grounds, guarded, no way to escape. He is told, you work for US now. You will develop torsion bar suspension for Soviet tanks. You have no choice. Klaue understands his situation. He's a prisoner, but he's also an engineer. And he's given a team, Soviet engineers, the ones who developed the T-34. They know their Christie suspension is outdated. They want to learn. So Klaue begins to teach. He draws the Panther plans from memory, the dual torsion bar configuration, the bearings, the connection to the road wheel, the interleaved wheel geometry, everything, and the Soviets copy it, exactly copy it. They ask questions. Why this steel alloy? Klaue explains, chromium for hardness, molybdenum for toughness, vanadium for grain refinement. The heat treatment is critical, 850 degrees Celsius oil quench, too hot, the steel becomes brittle, too cold, not enough hardness. The Soviet metallurgists take notes. They will adopt the exact recipe. Why the dual torsion bar configuration? Klaue explains the mathematics. Suspension travel is proportional to the length of the torsion bar. But you can't just lengthen the bar. No room in the chassis. The solution: 2 bars, folded, double the effective length in the same space. The Soviet designers understand immediately. This is brilliant. They will use it. 6 months later, April 1947, the first prototype rolls out of the factory. Internal code: T-54. It looks like a T-34, but under the chassis, torsion bars, German torsion bars, exactly according to Hermann Klaue's specifications. Suspension travel, 248 millimeters, almost identical to the Panther. The Soviet engineers test the vehicle. Odijuka test range, the very same region where 78 years later a T-90M would meet its end. The T-54 cruises across rough terrain at 30 miles per hour. The crew reports, unbelievably stable. We can aim while moving. It's like a German tank. Exactly. It is a German tank with a Soviet turret and engine. But the chassis? Panther, 1943. Stalin approves production. 1,000 units per year starting in 1948. The goal, to outproduce the West. By 1958, 35,000 T-54s are rolling off the assembly lines. By 1981, when production finally grinds to a halt, that number swells to 100,000. The most produced tank in history. Every single one sporting torsion bar suspension. Based on German design, Hermann Klaue labors in Nizhny Tagil until 1952, 6 years of forced labor. Then he's granted permission to return to Germany. He's 58 years old at this point, broken. His health is shattered. He passes away in 1974. His name? It's nowhere to be found in any Soviet T-54 manual. No recognition, no royalties, nothing. But his technology? It lives on. T-54, T-55, T-62, T-64, T-72, T-80, T-90, T-90M. Every Soviet and Russian tank for the next 80 years uses torsion bar suspension. In total, over 200,000 tanks produced, all based on Klaue's work, on German war technology from 1943. But the Soviets weren't the only ones. The Americans had their own captured Panthers, the 127-page Aberdeen reports, and after the war, with no German foe, they could finally shift production. 1949 sees the introduction of the M46 pattern. The first American tank with torsion bar suspension. Take a look at the specifications. Torsion bars, chromium molybdenum steel, wheel travel, 240 millimeters, almost identical to the Panther. The engineers at Aberdeen had done a thorough job. They had meticulously analyzed the German bars, replicated the alloy, copied the design. The M46 becomes the standard M47, M48, M60, all with torsion bars. 25,000 tanks produced until 1987, all based on German technology. No royalties paid, never mentioned in official history books, but the technological lineage is unmistakable. And then comes the ultimate irony, Germany, 1965. The Bundeswehr needs a new main battle tank. The Leopard 1 is developed by Krauss-Maffei. The engineers study modern tank designs. They see the M60, the Centurion, the T-54, all utilizing torsion bars. So, they decide, torsion bars for the Leopard 1. They don't know, or they don't admit, that they're copying their own 22-year-old technology. The Panther, the design that Hermann Klaue and Ernst Lehr had perfected in 1943. Now it's being bought back by Germany, from American and British consultants, using Aberdeen data that originated from captured German tanks. The Leopard 1 cost Germany 2.5 million Deutschmarks per unit. 2,400 units are produced. Total cost, 6 billion Deutschmarks. They're buying back their own stolen technology for billions. But it gets even more absurd. 1979, Leopard 2, the most advanced Western tank, torsion bars, of course, chromium molybdenum vanadium, wheel travel, 250 millimeters, exactly like the Panther. The physics haven't changed. The optimal design was achieved in 1943. 3,500 Leopard 2s are produced. Cost per unit, 5 million euros. Total cost, 17.5 billion euros. Germany pays. For Panther technology, again. And now in 2025, these tanks are battling in Ukraine. Leopard 2A6, German technology from 1943. Sold to Germany for billions, now supplied to Ukraine. Who are they fighting? T-90M, Russian technology. But under the chassis, the same torsion bars, the same physics. Panther 1943. That's the irony. On February 15, 2025, a Leopard 2A6 is struck near Avdiivka. Russian artillery. A torsion bar shatters. The tank is immobilized. 4 days later, February 19th, a T-90M is hit by a Ukrainian drone. The torsion bars fail. The tank is stranded. Same vulnerability. Panther 1944 had the same problem. German reports from the Ardennes offensive. If a torsion bar is damaged by shelling, the entire wheel station must be removed. Time required, 12 hours, under combat conditions. 82 years later, Leopard 2 and T-90M, identical problem, identical physics, because they both used the same design. And then came Douglas O'Regan's book, November 25, 2024. Taking Nazi technology, Allied exploitation of German science after the Second World War, Johns Hopkins University Press, 376 pages, 1,247 citations. O'Regan is a historian. He spent years in archives, National Archives USA, Russian State Archives, German Federal Archives, British National Archives in Kew. He has documented the entire Operation Paperclip and Operation Paperclip's Shadow, the systematic plundering of German technology. Chapter 7 deals with tanks. He cites the Aberdeen reports, The Bovington analyses, the Soviet Kubinka tests. He documents Hermann Klause's deportation, Ernst Lehr's forced labor, the exact copying of the Panther torsion bars in the T-54. And he asks the question that no one wants to ask: was this theft or spoils of war? National Interest publishes an article on the same day. Did Nazi technology make the USA a superpower? The answer is complicated. But with tanks, the answer is yes. Without captured Panther technology, the M46 would not have existed. Without the M46, no M48. Without the M48, no M60. Without the M60, no M1 Abrams. The entire American post-war tank line is based on German war research. And the Soviets? Without Hermann Klaue, no T-54. Without the T-54, no 200,000 Soviet tanks. Without these tanks, no Soviet tank dominance in the Cold War. The technological lineage is absolutely clear, but no one ever paid royalties. No one ever compensated Hermann Klaue or his family. No one ever recognized Ernst Lehr. Their names have vanished from the history books. But their technology, it lives on, in every modern tank worldwide. And now, as I write this script, 350,000 tanks are in active production or service, all with torsion bar suspension, T-90Ms in Russia, M1A2 Abrams in the USA, Leopard 2A8s in Germany, Challenger 3s in the UK, Leclercs in France, Merkavas in Israel, Type 99As in China, K2 Black Panthers in South Korea, Arjuns in India, every single one, using the concept that Ernst Lehr perfected in 1943. The question isn't if the technology was stolen. The technical reports prove that. Aberdeen, September 1944. Torsion bar suspension will be adopted for future US tanks. Bovington, March 1945. British post-war tanks will use torsion bars. Kubinka Report, March 1945, declassified in 1991. Torsion bar suspension is mandatory for Soviet tanks after 1946. The documents exist. The question is, was it legal? After a war, the technology of the loser belongs to the victor. That's the spoils of war, internationally accepted. But what about the engineers? Hermann Klaue was no Nazi. He was no war criminal. He was an engineer who designed a better suspension mechanism, and he was deported. 6 years of forced labor, forced to reproduce his own technology for the enemy. Is that legal? The Geneva Conventions state, forced labor of prisoners of war is acceptable for non-war-related work. But in 1946, the war was over. Klaue was no prisoner of war. He was a civilian engineer. His deportation was technically an abduction, but nobody protested. The Soviet Union had 27 million dead in the war. They felt they had the right to take German technology, by force if necessary. And the Americans, the British, they took the Panther designs from Aberdeen and Bovington. No deportations, just blueprints. Is that better? Is it more moral to copy technology without abducting the engineers? O'Regan's book poses these questions. It offers no easy answers, but it documents the facts, and the facts are clear. 350,000 tanks worldwide are based on German technology from 1943. Developed by engineers whose names are forgotten, whose work was systematically copied, whose families were never compensated. And Germany? Germany today pays billions to buy tanks based on German technology. The Leopard 2A8 just ordered 6 billion euros for 105 tanks, 57 million euros apiece. The torsion bars, chromium, molybdenum, vanadium. Suspension travel, 250 millimeters. Panther 1943, Germany is buying back its own technology for the third time. And the manufacturers, Rheinmetall, Krauss Maffei, they're producing based on designs that came from Aberdeen reports, that came from captured Panthers, that were designed by Ernst Lehr. But Lehr's name appears nowhere in the marketing materials, nowhere in the technical manuals. He's forgotten. His technology is everywhere. But what about the other countries? China produces the Type 99A, torsion bars, copied from the Soviet T-72, which came from the T-54, which was designed by Hermann Klaue. South Korea produces the K2 Black Panther, torsion bars, designed based on M1 Abrams consultants who used Aberdeen data that came from captured Panthers. Israel produces the Merkava, torsion bars, developed with British assistance based on Bovington analyses of captured German tanks. India produces the Arjun, torsion bars, technology transfer from Germany, which had copied from Aberdeen. The chain is endless. Every country copied from another, but they all lead back to one source. Henschel Industries Kassel, 1943, Ernst Lehr and Hermann Klaue, German engineers who wanted to solve one problem, how to build a better tank suspension. They had no idea that their solution would be used in 350,000 tanks worldwide 80 years later. They had no idea that the Soviet Union would abduct them to copy their work. They had no idea that Germany itself would one day pay billions to buy their technology back. But that's exactly what happened. And now, in 2025, tanks are fighting each other in Ukraine, both using the same suspension technology. Leopard 2 versus T-90M, Panther 1943 versus Panther 1943, the ultimate irony of German engineering. And then the question becomes, what happened to the other deported engineers? Operation Paperclip's Shadow deported a total of 2,500 German engineers, not just tank specialists, rocket scientists, submarine designers, aircraft engineers, electronics experts, chemists, everyone who had developed cutting-edge technology for the German armed forces. They were all arrested on the night of October 22, 1946. Within 24 hours, the operation had been planned for months. The NKVD had created lists. Every engineer in the Soviet occupation zone who had militarily valuable knowledge was marked. 3 a.m., arrest. 6 a.m., transport to the nearest train station. 12 noon, freight cars heading east. The journey took 2 weeks. The conditions were brutal. Freight cars with no heating, October in Russia, temperatures near 0 degrees, little food, no medical care. Several deportees died en route. Their families were forced to come along, so the engineers couldn't escape. Emotional blackmail. If you escape, your wife will be arrested. Your children will go to an orphanage. Most stayed. What could they do? Hermann Klaue arrived in Nizhny Tagil. Other engineers were sent to different cities. Helmut Grotrup, V-2 rocket specialist, to Kapustin Yar. He would develop the Soviet R-1 rocket, an exact copy of the V-2. Werner Baum, jet engine expert, to Kuybyshev. He would work on Soviet jet engines. Nicholas Riehl, nuclear physicist, to Elektrostall. He would help build Soviet atomic bombs. Each of these men was a world-class expert, and they were all forced to work for the Soviet Union, under guard, with no pay except minimal subsistence, 6 to 10 years of forced labor, and then, when they were no longer useful, some were allowed to return. Many were not. Hermann Klaue worked in Nizhny Tagil for 6 years, from 1946 to 1952. He taught Soviet engineers everything about torsion bars, the alloy, the heat treatment, the geometric configuration, the storage, the integration into the chassis. The Soviets absorbed every detail. They asked thousands of questions. Klaue answered. What could he do? He was a prisoner, and he was an engineer. If you give him a technical problem, he solves it. That's his nature. The Soviets understood that. They treated him relatively well. Better housing than regular workers, more food, access to technical books, but he was still a prisoner, guarded, controlled. His mail was censored, his movements restricted. He couldn't leave Nizhny Tagil. And then, in 1952, his work was done. The T-54 was in mass production, 5,000 copies produced. The Soviet engineers completely understood the technology. They no longer needed Klaus. In March 1952, he was told, "You are allowed to return to Germany." He was 58 years old. His health was ruined. 6 years in Siberian conditions, poor nutrition, stress. He returned to Kassel, his hometown. But Henschel Industries no longer existed. The factory had been destroyed in the war. There was no work for a tank suspension engineer in West Germany in 1952. Germany wasn't producing tanks. It was forbidden until 1955. Hermann Klaue lived off a meager pension. He never spoke publicly about his time in the Soviet Union. Too traumatic, too dangerous even. The Cold War was at its height. He died in 1974 at the age of 80. His obituary in the Kassel newspaper mentioned former Henschel engineer. No mention of the Panther, no mention of the deportation, no mention that his work lived on in 100,000 Soviet tanks. He was forgotten. But his technology, it dominated the world. 1958, the Soviet Union had produced 35,000 T-54s. They were exporting them to China, Poland, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, Egypt, Syria. Every country in the Warsaw Pact and many allies received T-54s. China began its own production. The Type 59, a licensed T-54 clone, they produced 10,000 units by 1985. Everyone with German torsion bars. No license fees paid to Germany. North Korea produced the Chonma-ho, yet another T-54 derivative. 2,000 built. German technology, no payment. Soviet production continued. T-54, then T-55, an improved version. Same torsion bars. 50,000 built, then the T-62, the T-64, the T-72. All variations of the same fundamental technology. Torsion bar suspension, German design. By 1990, the Soviet Union and its allies had produced over 200,000 tanks with torsion bars, all based on Hermann Klause's work. The estimated value, if we calculate only the torsion bars, 200,000 tanks times 12 bars per tank times $12,700 material cost per bar equals $6.5 billion. Just the raw materials. The development value, the engineering work, the license fees, if it had been a normal technology transfer, conservatively estimated $55 billion. Not a single cent was ever paid. And the Americans? They had their own version. No deported engineers, just captured tanks and detailed reports. The Aberdeen Report from 1944 became the Bible for American tank development. Every post-war tank was designed with this report in mind. The M46 Patton, 1949. The first American tank with torsion bars, the specifications are telling. Suspension travel, 240 millimeters. Panther, 250 millimeters. Steel alloy, chromium molybdenum. Panther, chromium molybdenum vanadium, almost identical. The engineers at Detroit Arsenal had studied the Aberdeen Report. They had reproduced the German torsion bars as closely as possible without the original engineers, and it worked. The M46 was a success. Korean War, 1950-1953. M46 versus T-34. Both had better mobility than the Sherman, but the M46 had an advantage, 90mm gun versus the T-34's 85mm, and better optics. The torsion bars, roughly equivalent, both copied from German designs. The result, the USA produced 1,268 M46, then the M47, 8,576 units, then the M48, 11,703 units, then the M60, 15,000 units, every one with torsion bar suspension, every one based on the Aberdeen report, which came from captured Panthers. Total production by 1987, over 36,000 American tanks with German technology. Estimated license value, if it had been a normal transfer, $20 billion, paid $0. And then the M1 Abrams, 1980, the most modern American tank. The designers at Chrysler Defense studied all previous tanks. They wanted the best suspension. They tested hydrop pneumatics, too complicated. They tested coil springs, too outdated. They came back to torsion bars, but not just any torsion bars. Advanced torsion bars, titanium alloyed, computer optimized, suspension travel 260 millimeters, 10 millimeters more than the Panther. After 37 years, they had surpassed the Germans by 4%. Is that innovation or simply better materials? The physics are identical. The configuration is identical. The concept, Ernst Lehr, 1943. The M1 Abrams became the standard, 10,000 units produced by 2025. Cost per unit, $6 million in the year 2000, $10 million in the year 2020. Total cost, over $80 billion. The torsion bars are a small part of that, maybe 5% of the cost, but without them, the tank wouldn't work. The German armed forces are buying more M1A2 Abrams in 2024. Why? Compatibility with NATO. Germany is buying American tanks that use American torsion bars that were copied from German torsion bars. The irony is endless. But back to Germany itself. 1965, Leopard 1. The German armed forces needed a main battle tank. The first since 1945. The designers at Krauss-Maffei were young. They hadn't worked in the war. They studied international designs. M60, Centurion, T-54, all with torsion bars. So they decided torsion bars. They developed from scratch. Or so they thought. But their consultants, former engineers from Henschel Industries, men who had known the Panther, they advised chromium molybdenum vanadium, double torsion bar configuration. Interleaved road wheels for optimal weight distribution. Wait a minute, and that's all Panther. The young engineers didn't know it. To them, it was modern design, international standard. They didn't realize they were copying a 22-year-old German design. The Leopard 1 became a success. Mobility, outstanding. Suspension travel, 245 millimeters, only 5 millimeters less than the Panther. The German armed forces ordered 2,437 units, exported to 13 countries. Total of 4,144 built, cost $2.7 million Deutschmarks per unit. Total program, around $13 billion Deutschmarks, Germany paid for Panther technology without even knowing it. 1979, Leopard 2. Now they knew. The designers had access to old Henschel archives. They studied the Panther directly. They saw the design was optimal. Why change it? So, Leopard 2, torsion bars, chromium molybdenum vanadium, suspension travel 250 millimeters, exactly like the Panther. They improved other aspects, armor, gun, fire control system, engine, but the suspension? Why change something perfect? 3,180 Leopard 2s were produced. Cost, 4.3, $7.6 million euros per unit, depending on the variant. Total program, over $21.7 billion euros. Germany paid, again, for the technology that Ernst Lehr developed in 1943. And then came the upgrades. Leopard 2A5, 2A6, 2A7. Each update cost billions, but the torsion bars, unchanged. Chromium molybdenum vanadium, 250 millimeters suspension travel, Panther 1943, 2024, Leopard 2A8 is announced. Price €61.8 million per tank. Order 105 units for the German Armed Forces. Total cost €6.5 billion. The torsion bars, still chromium, molybdenum, vanadium, still 250mm suspension travel, still Panther 1943. Germany is buying its own technology back for the third time for €6.5 billion. And now you understand the full extent of it. Worldwide 2025, the M1 Abrams, 10,000 produced, cost $80 billion. Torsion bars, German design. The Leopard 2, 3,480 produced, cost €20 billion. Torsion bars, German design. The Soviet T-series, 200,000 produced, cost impossible to estimate, but over $100 billion. Torsion bars, German design, stolen via Hermann Klaue. Challenger 2, 446 produced, cost £4 billion. Torsion bars, copied from captured Panthers, Bovington 1944. Leclerc, 406 produced, cost €3 billion. Torsion bars, French design based on NATO studies, based on Aberdeen, based on Panther. Merkava, 2,000 produced, cost $8 billion. Torsion bars, Israeli design with British assistance, based on Bovington, based on Panther. Type 99, Chinese, 1,200 produced, cost unknown. Torsion bars, copied from Soviet T-72, based on T-54, based on Hermann Klaue, based on Panther. K2 Black Panther Korean, 300 plus produced, cost $5 billion. Torsion bars, developed with German assistance, based on Leopard 2, based on Leopard 1, based on Panther. The chain always leads back. Henschel Industries, Kassel 1943, Ernst Lehr and Hermann Klaue. Two engineers solving a problem, and their solution would become the foundation for 350,000 tanks. Over 80 years, in every country in the world. Conservatively estimated total value of tank programs using torsion bars, $500 billion globally. Paid to Germany, $0. But wait, there's another aspect no one discusses. The torsion bars themselves are only part of the story. The real genius was the overall system, the overlapping wheels of the Panther. That wasn't an accident. Lehr and his team had optimized the entire geometry. Overlapping wheels distribute the weight over more contact points. This reduces ground pressure. The Panther weighed 45 tons. Ground pressure, 0.88 kilograms per square centimeter. The Sherman weighed 30 tons. Ground pressure, 1.05 kilograms per square centimeter. The heavier Panther had less ground pressure, better off-road mobility. This was revolutionary engineering, and the Soviets copied part of it. The T-54 doesn't have a full overlapping wheel system. Too complicated for mass production. Too difficult to maintain in the mud. Mud freezes between the wheels, but they took the concept. More wheels, better weight distribution. The T-54 has 6 wheels per side. The T-34 had 5. The Americans learned 2. The M46 has 6 wheels. The Sherman had 6 but smaller. The M1 Abrams has 7 wheels. Each generation, more wheels. Why? Because the Panther had shown more contact points, better mobility. German engineers in 1943 had perfected the mathematics. And today, 2025, these designs are fighting in Ukraine. T-90M, most modern Russian tank, torsion bars, German design via T-54, via Hermann Klaue, 6 wheels, concept influenced by the Panther, Leopard 2A6, German tank, torsion bars directly from the Panther, 7 wheels, further development of the overlapping wheel concept. Avdiivka, February 2025, a T-90M is hit, artillery, the explosion hits the left side. A torsion bar breaks. The vehicle tilts to the left. The crew can't drive. They abandon the tank. 4 days later, a Leopard 2A6 is hit, Russian artillery. The explosion damages 2 torsion bars on the right side. The tank is immobilized. The crew evacuates. The same vulnerability, the same physics. The Panther in 1944 had the exact same problem. German reports from the Ardennes, December 1944. If a torsion bar is damaged by enemy fire, repair under combat conditions is extremely difficult. The entire wheel station must be removed. Time required, 10-14 hours with full tools, under fire, impossible. The tank must be abandoned. 81 years later, Avdiivka, T-90M and Leopard 2, identical problem, identical vulnerability. Why? Because both use the same technology. Torsion bars are strong, but when they break, the tank is finished. There is no quick fix. The physics haven't changed. The design hasn't changed. Ernst Lehr in 1943 had designed the optimal system, but he had also created its limitations. And 81 years later, soldiers are fighting with those limitations. Imagine the irony. German engineers design the Panther. Allies capture it. Soviets deport the engineers. Everyone copies the design. Everyone produces tens of thousands of tanks. And then, 80 years later, these tanks are fighting each other. In Ukraine, Russian tanks with German technology, stolen in 1946. German tanks with German technology, bought back for billions, both immobilized by the same vulnerability, both victims of the same physics. That's the ultimate lesson of technology. There is no good or evil, only physics. A torsion bar twists, stores energy, releases it. That's mechanics. It works for everyone. Germany, Soviet Union, USA, China, Korea. It doesn't matter who uses it. Physics is neutral. But the people are not neutral. Hermann Klaue was deported. 6 years of forced labor. He taught his enemies how to copy his invention. Then he was thrown away. Ernst Lehr died in Kassel, forgotten. His name in no modern tank manual. But their technology, it lives on. In 350,000 tanks. In every modern military in the world. Their names are forgotten. Their work is everywhere. These technical truths aren't just history. They're in every smartphone, every airplane, every rocket flying today. Every modern military vehicle uses concepts that German engineers perfected under extreme pressure, and the story of this technology, how it was stolen, copied, deported, sold, tells us something about the nature of innovation itself. If you appreciate this technical documentation, if you believe these forgotten engineers deserve recognition, if you'd like me to continue uncovering these hidden technical lineages, then support this channel with super thanks. This research requires hundreds of hours in archives, translations of Russian documents, studying technical reports. Your support enables this work. Thank you. Let's take technical stock. Panther, 1943, 6,000 produced. Cost, approximately 700 million Reichsmarks. Torsion bars, revolutionary, designed by Ernst Lehr and Hermann Klaue. T-54 line Soviet, 1947-1990, 100,000 produced, based on Hermann Klaue's forced labor. Cost, estimated $50 billion. Royalties paid to Germany, $0. M-Series American, 1949-1987, 36,000 produced. Based on Aberdeen analyses of captured Panthers, cost, estimated $100 billion. License fees paid to Germany, $0. The Leopard series German from 1965 to 2025, 6,900 produced, based on their own technology from 1943. Cost, an estimated 35 billion euros. Germany is buying back its own technology. The Challenger, British, 446 produced, based on studies from Bovington. Cost, £4 billion, license fees, 0. The Leclerc, French, 406 produced, based on NATO data, cost €3 billion. License fees, 0. The Merkava, Israeli, 2000 produced, based on British assistance, cost $8 billion. License fees, 0. The Type Series, Chinese, 15,000 produced, based on Soviet copies. Cost unknown, but estimated at $30 billion. License fees, 0. The K-Series, Korean, 1,700 produced, based on German assistance building on their own design, cost $8 billion. The Arjun, Indian, 124 produced, based on technology transfer, cost $1 billion. The total number of tanks using torsion bar suspension based on the Panther design, 350,000 units. The total global investment in these programs, an estimated $500 billion over 80 years. Paid to the German inventors or their families, $0. Paid to Germany as a nation, $0. Paid by Germany to buy back its own technology, 35+ billion euros. That's the balance sheet. Technically, financially, emotionally. 2 engineers solve a problem in 1943. Their solution becomes the foundation of a $500 billion industry. They see not 1 cent. Their names are forgotten. But wait, there's one more twist. 2025. Germany orders 105 Leopard 2A8s, 6 billion euros, the most modern torsion bars, computer-optimized, titanium alloyed. Joint element analysis, but the basic configuration. Double torsion bars, chromium molybdenum vanadium base with titanium additions. Travel 252 millimeters. The Panther in 1943, 250 millimeters. 82 years of development, a 2 millimeter improvement. That's less than 1%. What does this tell us? That Ernst Lehr achieved a near-perfect design in 1943. Physics simply doesn't allow for a significant improvement. Longer torsion bars require more space, which doesn't exist. Stronger alloys are marginally better, but also more expensive. The optimal design was achieved in 1943, and in 2025, we're still using it. But here's the deeper question. Was the technology transfer theft? Under international law, spoils of war are legal. The Allies won the war. German technology belonged to them. Studying captured Panthers was legal. Copying the designs was legal. But deporting Hermann Klaue, that was in 1946, after the war ended. He was no longer a prisoner of war. He was a civilian engineer. His deportation was technically abduction. And his forced labor? The Geneva Conventions prohibit forced labor of civilians. The Soviet Union violated international law. But who would protest? The Cold War had begun. The West had taken its own German scientists, Operation Paperclip, Werner von Braun, and 1,600 others. All voluntary, the Americans said. But was it really voluntary when the alternative was Soviet imprisonment? The moral lines are blurred. What is clear, 2 engineering geniuses created something revolutionary. The world took it, without payment, without recognition, and still uses it today. Douglas O'Regan's book, Taking Nazi Technology, asks these questions. He offers no easy answers. He simply documents the facts. Operation Paperclip's shadow, 2,500 German engineers deported. Operation Paperclip, 1,600 German scientists recruited. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, hundreds of captured weapons analyzed. Bovington Tank Museum, dozens of German tanks studied. Kubinka, complete technical disassembly. The result, the largest technology transfer operation in history. Missiles. The V-2 became the basis of NASA and the Soviet space program. Jets, the Me-262 and Jumo-004 became the basis of all modern turbofans. Computers. Konrad Zus's Z3 influenced early digital computers. Submarines. The Type Wheat became the basis of all modern subs. Missiles. The Fritz X and HS-293 became the basis of guided weapons. And tanks, Panther torsion bars, became the basis of 350,000 modern tanks. National interest asks, did Nazi technology make the USA a superpower? Partially, yes. Without the V2, no Saturn V. Without the Saturn V. No moon landing. Without the moon landing, no technological advantage in the Cold War. The chain is clear, but the Soviet Union profited more in tanks. 200,000 tanks using German technology. That was the basis of Soviet military power in the Cold War. Without Hermann Klaue, the T-54 wouldn't have existed. Without the T-54, no Soviet tank dominance in Eastern Europe. And today, in Ukraine, both sides are fighting with German technology from 1943. Russian T-90Ms, German torsion bars via Klaue. German Leopard 2s, German torsion bars directly, both immobilized by the same weakness. Both victims of the same physics that Ernst Lehr perfected in 1943 in Kassel. The lesson: technology is neutral. It serves anyone who uses it. It knows no loyalty. It has no memory. A torsion bar works equally well for the Red Army as it does for the Bundeswehr, as it does for the US Army, as it does for the Chinese PLA. Physics does not discriminate, but people are deported. People are forgotten. People die unknown. Ernst Lehr and Hermann Klaue created something that has lasted 80 years, that lives in 350,000 machines, that enables a $500 billion industry, but their names unknown, except in obscure technical archives, except in this video. This is the true story of modern tank technology. Not nations, not armies, 2 engineers, a problem, a solution, and a world that took without thanking. If you've listened this far, you now understand. Every time a modern tank rolls, whether in Germany, Russia, America, China, Korea, it's using technology that 2 forgotten German engineers perfected in 1943. Every time a T-90M is destroyed in Ukraine, it proves the limitations of technology designed 82 years ago. Every time a Leopard 2 is immobilized, history repeats itself from the Ardennes in 1944. The technology hasn't changed. The weaknesses haven't changed. The physics is eternal, and the engineers forgotten. But now you know their names: Ernst Lehr, Hermann Klaue, Henschel Industries, Kassel, 1943. The men who enabled 350,000 tanks. The men whose work is worth $500 billion. The men who never saw a cent. The men who made history and then were forgotten by history until now. Now the question for you, is this theft or evolution? Should the Allies have paid royalties? Should Germany demand reparations for deported engineers? Or is war booty simply war booty, the price of defeat? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you know someone who's fascinated by military history, who appreciates cutting-edge technology, who really should know that every modern tank owes a debt to German war technology, share this video. The story of Ernst Lehr and Hermann Klaue deserves to be told. Their names deserve to be remembered. Their technology lives on in 350,000 tanks worldwide. Their story lives on in this video. Thank you for listening.